afternoon. My name is Lori Bumbaco. I'm an oncology dietitian here at Cancer Wellness Center, and I'm presenting to you live, or if you're watching the recording, it was live from Cancer Wellness Center. It's the first Friday of the month, and that means it's time for Ask the Dietitian. We pick a topic every month, and then you get to ask me any of your questions. I put together a PowerPoint, and then I present the answers to those questions. Now, if you've missed any previous Ask the Dietitians, have no fear, they are on our YouTube channel. We've been doing this for years now, so it's always bound to be fun and informative. So hopefully today is no exception. I'm going to share my screen and then start my PowerPoint. And we, as always, had some wonderful questions from our participants. They always keep me on my toes, so I'm going to try my best today to give you an informative, engaging presentation along with my answers to those questions. So today's topic for this month's topic for November is all about carbohydrates. And I just can't help but, use food puns in any presentation. So do not talk about carbs or you'll get a piece of me. Lots of carbs here, lots of carbs to enjoy, but we're going to explore what is the distinction between them? Which ones are recommended to be healthy? Where can we put some limits on some less healthy options? And really some practical takeaways, hopefully, from today's presentation. So on my agenda, as always, I'm going to list the questions one by one or categorize a couple together that were similar, and then provide my answers to them, and then share some resources along the way. All right. So this is probably a good place to start. So are there better carbohydrate sources than others? Are there any carbs that you would recommend we stay away from? I just don't understand carbs. They are like my ex-boyfriend. Some people say they are good for you, and others say to avoid them at all costs. Love that. I love when we get a little personality in our questions. So I just want to start with sort of the basics here, and we're going to talk about carbohydrates and really sort of just a quick overview of what they are. But again, I can't help but interject a little food humor and a little food puns here. So one of the ways that we classify carbohydrates is in their complexity in terms of their chemical structure. And I thought this cartoon was really cute. So complex carbs, they're having some existential crises here, as we can see. But complex carbs are our friend. And we're going to hopefully, when you work with a dietitian or work with me here, or even in my presentation today, we're going to invite a little more of our complex carbs into our overall healthy diet. So carbohydrates are one of the three macronutrients that we need to eat. So the other two are protein and fat, and they have several roles in our body. Eating carbohydrates, they're necessary, they're required, they're actually a very important part of a healthy diet, and I want you to understand that as a takeaway today. They absolutely provide our body with the energy that it likes the most. Our bodies are really happy when they receive carbohydrates. It's a great, readily available fuel source. The other thing that I think speaks to a lot of the individuals that I'm working with who might be on active treatment, who are post-treatment, maybe looking to maintain their muscle or their lean body mass, maybe working on building muscle. If they're doing that, what happens when we include carbohydrates in our overall healthy eating plan? It allows the protein that we're eating to be spared. That's what we call carbohydrates. Like they can spare protein, right? So the protein that we do eat can be reserved for what we want it to do, which is to build and repair our body, which is especially important along the continuum of cancer treatment. Now, carbohydrates are found they're like ubiquitous in our food supply. They're found in a wide variety of foods, from fruits and veggies, from grains and beans and dairies, down to some of our sugars and our sweets. They're often classified, as I shared, by the level of processing. So from least processed to most processed, we work here left to right. So complex, refined, and then simple carbohydrates. And this is all based on their chemical structure. And the word carbohydrate, just FYI, comes from the French, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it, meaning a hydrated carbon. So it's like this chemical structure as we know it. It's a science. Right. And so the complexity has to do with that chemical structure. And then the simple, when they're simple, it's sort of a less complex and complicated chemical structure. They're a little more simplistic. That's like a very basic overview, okay, just to kind of demonstrate a point. Now, if we're going to take a food and walk it along this spectrum, if we think of what complex carbohydrates are, it would be our whole kernel corn. So you see a little image of that there. A refined carbohydrate would be cornmeal. So taking that whole kernel corn, say that 5 times fast, and then refine it down into cornmeal. And then our simple carbohydrates would be something like corn syrup. So that's why you see some Caro there as an example. Now, lots of examples, but that's just one in particular to help demonstrate that point. So a helpful practical approach to carbohydrates is that we know that within our family of all the foods that have carbohydrates, some of those foods also have other nutrients along with them. So it's not just carbohydrates in the food, it has some friends. So but also on the other hand, there are some foods that have little to zero nutrients. So it's only carbs and maybe only simple or refined carbs and nothing else. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're navigating which choices are the best for us. So obviously, the food with carbs plus all that extra, all that bonus, all those other micronutrients and other cancer protective compounds, those are going to be the most nutritious choices. So they not only do they have carbohydrates, but they might have vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and phytochemicals, and really important, might have fiber, which is something we all need more of. And they add nutrition to our diet. And they also, according to the evidence, are associated with improving the overall quality of our diet and benefiting our health. So we want to eat those carbs, right? When we eat foods with high nutrient quality, that helps lower our risk for chronic disease and manage our weight, which I mentioned. So here are some of the best sources of carbs. And I don't know, when you look at these, it probably makes sense to you. It's fruits, it's vegetables, it's our starchy vegetables, not some, all of our starchy vegetables. Um, Not all of these are carbohydrates, right? Like flaxseed is mostly a fat. But whole grains, walnuts are mostly a fat. Soybeans, beans and lentils. The list goes on and on. These are just some examples within those groups of foods. But also, too, you may not be aware of this, plain yogurt and plain milk also have carbohydrates. Okay, so those are our best sources. Why are they our best sources? Because this colorful list of foods you see in front of you are cancer fighters. They're on that list. They are on everybody's list for what to eat when you're trying to protect yourself from cancer. When we incorporate dairy, like milk and yogurt specifically, we are also getting other nutrients, right? Our milk, our yogurt, they contain calcium, they contain vitamin D often because they're added, and then also some protein. So we see how the nutrition overall in this package is what tends to matter. So that's where I want you to think when it comes to choosing your carbohydrates. Hopefully that's helpful. And obviously minimally processed wherever possible, right? So frozen fruits and vegetables count. Canned fruits and vegetables also count, right? But some of them have better choices than others within that family of canned choices. Hopefully those with less added salt and those with less added sugar. Now, are carbs bad? I don't like that word bad. How could food be bad, right? Now, at their best, carbohydrates can provide nutrition to anyone's diet and are associated with minimizing the risk for colorectal cancer, maybe other cancers. We just don't have the solid evidence yet. Heart disease, stroke, obesity, and diabetes. So this sounds really promising, if you ask me. Sounds like carbs can be a really helpful tool in our approach. At their worst, the foods that have carbs with mostly added sugars provide a lot of extra calories without not a lot of nutrition, right? And eating a lot of those foods a lot of the time, well, that's associated with increasing our risk for becoming overweight, obese, and gaining weight. And that can increase our risk for chronic disease, right? Now, believe it or not, a healthy diet can include small amounts of simple carbs or sugars, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So, are all carbs bad? No, they're not. So the carbs to take caution with, because that's kind of going back to what the question was asking. And all the experts have said this for decades now, that sugar sweetened beverages are problematic. they are associated with increasing our risk for weight gain, overweight, and obesity, and that is associated with 13 different cancer types. So the sugar sweetened beverages are, to me, are pretty obvious: soda or sweet tea or juices that are not 100% juice, energy drinks, sweet coffee drinks, some of our electrolyte replacement drinks if we're not careful. So those rehydration drinks, we have to really scrutinize labels, and I'm going to help with that in a moment. So experts do advise that we limit or avoid these if at all possible in an overall healthy diet. Another consideration are added sugars. So when experts talk about healthy eating and balance and eating quality, we do know that they also recommend that we minimize added sugars. So added sugars are exactly what they sound like: sugars that are added to a food that were not originally there in the first place. So we'll find added sugars really hiding in a lot of foods that we might not be expecting. So a lot of our really sweet yogurts, our condiments, some granola bars or protein bars, the list goes on and on. But fortunately, we have this good old nutrition facts panel, which is a jumble of confusing numbers, if you ask me. But as it relates to the topic today, we're going to look at this added sugars line here. And this particular product in a 2/3 cup has 10 grams of added sugar. So that's 20% of a 2,000 calorie diet. Most of us might not need 2,000 calories, so that number now increases, right? Because that 10 grams of added sugar is going to be more in a lower calorie diet. It might be 25, 30%. So that 2/3 of a cup, that measly little 2/3 of a cup, I want you to take out your measuring cup and see how small that is. That's almost maybe a quarter of your day's worth of added sugar. So it can really add up quickly. Now, just for guidance, in a day, experts advise that women eat less than 24 grams of added sugar and men eat less than 36 grams of added sugar. You can go lower, but it just helps you understand that that's sort of the cap. That's our budget to work with. And if most days we can be below that goal, then we're doing a good job. Okay. So you can see how sugars can fit. There's room for your favorites if you agree. So how do we make carbs fit in a more practical way? A lot of times in presentations, I'm showing like a healthy plate model, and now maybe it's helping you make sense of it in terms of carbohydrates. So the carbohydrates on these plates here, so on the top plate, I see some, it looks like brown rice. In the middle plate, it's some corn tortillas, a lot of corn today. On the bottom, it's some whole kernel corn. Those are our carbohydrates on the plate, right? The remaining foods on the plate is protein, I see in the top left corner, and then the bottom are non-starchy vegetables. So really low in carbohydrates. There are some, but pretty low in carbohydrates. So that's how we can sort of make them work in an overall healthy eating plan. Okay. Now about that ex-boyfriend. I'm kind of a girl's girl, so I would really love to talk to this person. We want to, here's my only takeaway from this. How do we make sense of what I call nutrition noise? There is so much nutrition information, right? It's everywhere. It's at the click of a button. Everyone's talking about it, but the people who are talking about it, and even this includes the media, they don't quite get it. They don't have the training and the background and the experience and the credentials to be speaking about the subject matter the way that they are. It's really complicated. Food is complicated. The way we digest food is complicated. The way we metabolize food is complicated. And health and diseases, cancer is one of the most complicated diseases I am aware of. So imagine the relationship between all of those things put together. It's involved, right? And so the only way to make sense of it all is to work with someone you trust to help clarify what you're encountering in terms of that nutrition noise. Now, whenever we encounter information that sounds extreme, like something like no carb is the only way to go. This is a really good example of like an incomplete explanation about what the research shows, because as it relates to carbs, no carbs doesn't seem to be the answer. And so any research that's ever been done about low or very low carbohydrate diets needs to be put into context, because there's research that refutes it or disputes it, and that, adequate carbs or higher carbs might actually also be healthy. So again, I think we want to look big picture here. We always want to apply a healthy skepticism around the information you receive from any source, other than, of course, your friendly dietitian or your healthcare team that you trust. Okay, so moving on. So again, like how many carbohydrates, more specifically, how many good carbs per day? That was like a loaded question. I love that. All right, so I sort of talked about like limiting the added sugars. So we're going to talk now about, how much of the good carbs to eat. So the amount of carbohydrate intake required for optimal human health is actually unknown. Did you know that? And I love sharing this because I am not too proud to admit that there's a lot that we don't know. And same goes for me. So we don't know, and research is trying to figure it out. We're trying to like just go off of experience to see what is helping people. And I think at the end of the day, that's the best way to guide ourselves. So the current recommended dietary allowance for carbohydrates for adults that do not have diabetes is 130 grams per day. And this really is based on the fact that our brain has a requirement for glucose, and it seems like that's the minimum in which it will optimally function. Now there's technicalities about this because when we eat protein, if we're not eating enough carbohydrates, our protein actually gets transformed into sugar so that the brain is happy and it's getting its food. So technically, we could go less than 30 grams of carbohydrates per day if we're eating a lot of protein, because the protein's just going to turn over into sugar as well. So that's just a technicality there. But 130 is a good working number for a minimum. Now, experts and myself in practice, we use a percent. We most often use a percent of calories from carbohydrates to determine how much is best for each person. And I like to kind of keep this little table in my little my little pocket guide so that I kind of have numbers to work with right off the top of my head. So, based on the number of calories you might be eating, you can determine how much of the carbohydrates every day you want to eat based on what percentage of calories from carbohydrates you want. So, we're going to go through an example of 1,500 calories. Now, most experts, as I'm going to explain next, recommend a range of about 40 to 60, maybe a little higher than 60 of calories from carbohydrates per day. Now, stay with me because this is going to take some time. I don't typically advise anyone go less than 40%. When you approach less than 40% of calories from carbohydrates, you're now starting to kind of dabble into the world of a ketogenic diet. And within the research of the ketogenic diet, we don't have a lot because guess what? Not a lot of people are able to sustain a ketogenic diet. It's actually really hard to stick with. And there's a question later in the series that I'm going to help kind of explore this too. But let's go back to these numbers. So it makes sense within this range of about 40, 45, up to 65% of our calories from carbohydrates. We get to decide. And that's why working with a dietitian helps. So we are going to balance these macronutrients according to, so carbohydrates, protein, and fat, according to acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. It's good talk for the Thanksgiving table, if you ask me. So in other words, our calories basically get distributed. We're going to eat this many calories, we're going to give this much to carbs, we're going to give this much to protein, and then we're going to give that much to fat. Now, this satisfies essential nutrient requirements, and this has been shown to promote health and reduce disease risk. So we sort of want to stay within these ranges if we can help it. So as I shared, 45 to 65% of carbohydrates, about 10 to 35% from protein, and about 20 to up to 35% of our calories from fat. Now, that's a wide range for each of those, right? So again, working with a dietitian can help you fine tune that to make the most sense for yourself. It's all going to be based on your goals, your personal goals, which are unique, right? And then your medical history is going to dictate what probably makes the most sense. And then what you agree you can sustain for the rest of your life, because that's the hope, is that you're going to eat this way the rest of your life. So for someone who's eating 1,500 calories, they may choose anywhere from about 45 up to 65% of their calories from carbohydrates. So that means about 675 calories up to 975 calories. So some people who are tracking or who are very savvy about numbers and know what they're eating, they read food labels, this might be good guidance for you. Okay, you're kind of speaking my language when you do that. Now, in terms of grams, all we have to do is divide those numbers by 4, because for every gram of carbohydrate, there are 4 calories. So that means 168 grams up to 243 grams of carbohydrates every day. If you remember, the requirement right now looks like 130 grams, and that's to support, physiological processes in our body. So that sort of puts that in perspective for you. So in a healthy meal plan for a day, again, we're going to look at ranges. So maybe 4 to up to 6 servings of bread, 2 to 3 servings of fruit, 2 servings of dairy, right, for our yogurt and our milk, because that's where we find our carbohydrates. There are some starchy vegetables in there, so we might add that sort of the bread and the starchy group. You might be wondering, where's the nuts and the seeds and where are my proteins? That's because they don't have carbs, right? So we're going to work those other numbers depending on your carbs first. Now we know what's left over to distribute between protein and fat. And again, this is complicated, but this is what dietitians do. So if you want to see a sample meal plan, this is it. And so this particular sample meal plan is for 1,500 calories, and it offers about 180 grams of carbohydrate per day. Okay, so it satisfies that requirement. It's like right at 40, a little less than 45%. This is a sample meal plan. This is a little more vegetarian. Like I see some tofu in there. Yay, tofu. And this one goes up a little higher to 220 grams of carbohydrate. But what you're hopefully noticing here is that there's this really, I think, quite healthy, quite diverse offering. It looks sort of like a lot of food, but maybe once we break it down, it might not be. But I see a lot of vegetables. I can imagine color with that stir fry. And it's a lot of these foods are minimally processed, but it's really giving a ton of nutrition, right, in these foods. So if you've registered for the program, you're going to get a chance to look at both of these sample meal plans for yourself. Okay. Now, again, only a dietitian can really prescribe the amount of calories that are best for you. Some people need more, some people need less than this. So let's move on. So I love that someone asked these questions, or two people asked similar questions. Why does it seem like I gain weight more easily when I start eating carbs, even eating healthy carbs like sourdough? How delicious is sourdough? I don't believe the hype about carbs. I'm proud of you. But I notice, meaning like the hype that they're bad, I think, right? But I notice when I eat carbs in moderation, like bread or pasta, I do seem to put on weight. So during my normal diet, I don't tend to eat a lot of carbs, right? Like bread and pasta, like the starchy ones, but I do have some fruit. There are some carbs in my veggies and I'm eating sweets. So what's going on here? It seems like when I add these carbs back in, I do gain weight. Well, let's try to dissect that for a second. So here's what we know. Carbs by themselves do not cause weight gain. Yes, believe it or not, that's the hype you're talking about. Carbs also, just FYI, they do not cause diabetes. I heard an expert say the other day, carbs do not cause diabetes, but they'll let you know you have it, which I thought was very interesting. And that's for another Ask the Dietitian another time. There's a lot of factors that dictate what someone weighs. And this is another Ask the Dietitian, but I can't help myself. I have to explain this. It's so involved, and I think that this is why we haven't had an easy time figuring this out in our country. It's been decades, probably like a half a century now, where we've had this issue with our weight, and managing our weight seems to be really problematic. But it's probably because our methods of trying to help support people manage their weight do not factor in all of these variables that influence what we weigh. Some of these things are out of our control, and some of them are. Right. So biology is one, so that considers our genetics. Some of us are just predisposed to put weight on. The aging process, medical conditions, certainly prescriptions, our lifestyle, our behavior. Here's where we have some opportunity to empower ourselves and control how we're moving our bodies or what we're eating. And then the environment, goodness gracious, it depends on what your food budget is. What food do you have available to you? What is your skill set in the kitchen? Where do you work? Is it a vending machine that you have to go to because that's all you have for food options? There's a lot of things that factor in here and we want to keep in mind. Okay. But moving on. Anytime we add something, and I think this is pretty obvious, and hopefully the people asking these questions understand this too. If you were just eating normal and then added something back, you're probably going to gain, right? Like if you add something and then take something else away, that's different. But probably you're going to add something and add weight, right? Hopefully that makes sense. I was just working with someone where she was kind of confused because she added a protein shake and she's not able to lose weight. And I said, well, you added, right? So you probably have to take something away somewhere if you're looking to lose. Now, here's a little lesson in science and biochemistry. When we eat low or very low carbohydrate, we do not store the extra carbs as glycogen, right? Because our body's just using them. Our body loves those carbs, remember, so it's going to use them very efficiently. And if it's not high enough, it's just going to use them and not store them. The storage form is glycogen, and we store it in our muscles and in our liver for good reason, because we want to tap into that if we need to or if we're starving. So, glycogen itself as a molecule is composed of water and glucose. So, guess what happens when we start storing glucose as glycogen? We put on water weight, right? So that's essentially what happens. So let's say we're eating more carbs than we have before, and we're now tipping above that threshold where we're not storing it, but now we're eating a little bit more. So we start to store it, right? And as soon as we store it, we're storing it with a lot of water, and the water is what we gain. And the reverse happens, right? So you might have noticed this. Let me go back a little bit. So if you have ever gone low or very low carbohydrate, you might lose weight relatively easily because you're taking the glycogen out of storage because that's what your body wants and is using it. And guess what you lose? You lose water. And that water weight comes off relatively quickly. It also comes on relatively quickly as soon as you start eating carbs again. So, what's the takeaway of that? I think you might want to dabble in what is sustainable. What are your goals? Do you want to maybe incorporate having a little bit more carbohydrates regularly? You'll probably gain a little weight and then maybe you settle out at that weight. Or just understand that when you add some carbs back in, because maybe it's here and there and once in a while, you're probably going to store some with water. And then you could probably take it off once you stop storing it because you're going to lose the water. Hopefully the way I'm explaining that makes sense, but that's sort of the working theory there. Now, I probably would need to know more because there might be more to this story behind what's happening in these two scenarios, but that might help to explain what probably is happening here. Okay. So next questions. Could you please talk about the role of complex carbohydrates? Those are our friends again in managing prediabetes, and what should carbs be paired with for blood sugar control? Really great questions here. Okay, so prediabetes, just FYI, it's where blood sugar levels are higher than normal, but not yet high enough to be diagnosed as having diabetes. And so this is the numbers that we look at. So plasma glucose or blood sugar, that is a fasting number. If it's less than 99, that's quote unquote normal. If you are finding your numbers are 100 to 125, that's defined as prediabetes. And if it's over 120, 126 or over, that is type 2 diabetes. We also look at A1C levels. And so a normal A1C level is less, quote unquote, normal, less than 5.7%. Between 5.7 and 6.4% is defined as having prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes is more than that, 6.5% or more. So this may be shocking to you. 1 out of 3 Americans are thought to have prediabetes. And the problem is that we don't have any symptoms. So how would you know, right? Unless you're getting your annual physical and you're really on the lookout for it. Now, there's this amazing website where you can do like a risk assessment to see even if you're at risk for diabetes and if you need to go to your healthcare team and ask for this to be evaluated. Check this link out. It's like brand spanking new. I haven't even explored it as much as I've wanted to just yet, but I'm going to probably at like 2 o'clock tonight. I've included it in the resources as well. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Even if you're not concerned about that prediabetes, it has a wealth of information about blood sugars. I think there's even recipes on the website. It's really, really fantastic. I'm really happy with its development. I think it's going to be a helpful resource. So back to prediabetes and what to do with our complex carbs. But the issue with prediabetes is that if you have prediabetes, you are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes as well as increasing the risk for heart disease and stroke. Yikes, right? But there's some really good news that I like to share. For some people with prediabetes, early treatment, as well as moderate, not insane lifestyle change, but just moderate lifestyle change, it can return blood sugar levels back to a normal range. Yoo-hoo, right? So this can effectively prevent or even delay, because sometimes, again, there's that predisposition, delay type 2 diabetes. That is awesome. And that really speaks to the power of prevention, right? And that's a lot of times why working with a dietitian is our best effort, is really in this proactive preventative role. Okay. So, according to guidelines, if someone has prediabetes and is overweight or defined as being obese, they may benefit from having an intensive lifestyle intervention program that includes individualized goal setting components. And so, the diabetes prevention program exists. I think even with the shutdown, they're still operating and functional. That prediabetes website link that I just shared on the last slide will help you find one if you're interested in that. And then medical nutrition therapy is what dietitians do, not wellness coaches, not our Instagram influencers, not Chat GPT, but MNT is medical nutrition therapy with a dietitian. And that is really technical, clinical, and the most efficacious. That's why it's part of the guidelines, right? Now, prediabetes, and for someone with prediabetes and also is at a healthy weight, so not necessarily overweight or obese, the recommendation is to consider a lifestyle intervention that incorporates both aerobic and resistance exercise, as well as a healthy eating plan, such as the Mediterranean style eating plan, right? So I haven't really gotten into complex carbs yet, because I know that's what the question was, but those are the guidelines. That's the evidence I wanted to share with you. And you deserve to know that more, even beyond this answer about complex carbs. Okay, so here's the thing, we don't know. Based on all the research that's ever been done, the collective evidence suggests that there is not an ideal percentage of calories from carbs from our macros. So we don't know, right? So a lot of it's just going to be sort of trial and error or working with a dietitian. So it really is based on an individualized assessment, current eating patterns, preferences, your metabolic goals. Complex carbs are important, but remember how much and the remaining lifestyle components probably matter just as much. If you are overweight, that is definitely going to play into this as well. So all the complex carbs that you plan out and are diligent about including, weight management might also be just as important, if not more important. So I want you to keep that in mind. Okay. So blood sugar control. I'm going to go through this rather quickly. This is sort of boring old advice. And it's nothing new. But here's what we know. If you want to control blood sugars best, we want you to eat smart. So remember that plate that I showed you? Go back to that plate. And every time you're eating a meal, or most times, or you have a bowl of food, try to design it, try to structure it like that plate was. Mostly non-starchy vegetables, some fruit in there, a pocket for whole grains or starchy vegetables, a pocket for beans, and then our lean proteins, and like fish and seafood and eggs. Okay. Lots of water. As it turns out, drinking water can help hydrate us and maintain healthy blood sugar levels. Movement is certainly a key component of managing blood sugars and managing weight. Okay, so work with either a dietitian, ask your care provider for a referral to one, work with me here, join groups here. We got lots to offer that can help you pursue that. And no nicotine, because that obviously influences blood sugars too. Okay, so balancing macros for blood sugars can help, as we've been talking about. As we know it, of all the macronutrients, fats do not break down into glucose, and it delays digestion to minimize blood sugar spikes, while protein and fiber in those complex carbs delay digestion as well. So we want to delay digestion. It slows things down, and it also slows down the rise of blood sugars. So we want to eat fiber-rich carbs, plus protein, plus heart-healthy fats, and this is answering that second question. So here are some examples. Some sprouted toast, that's your carb. Some mashed avocado is your healthy fat, and then egg is your lean protein. A cup of plain low-fat yogurt is your carbs, with some berries that are carbs, but there's lots of fiber in there. That yogurt also gives some protein, and then those nuts are going to add some fat as well, and a little bit of protein. Our fish is a lean protein. Our farro or quinoa is our complex high fiber carb, and then our cauliflower. The fish has some protein and heart healthy fats. And then maybe a half of a low fat cheese sandwich and like a side salad. I'm thinking of like lunch. That all kind of fits the bill in terms of balancing macros so that you're pairing them together so that you're managing blood sugar the best way you can. Okay. I'm going to move through pretty quickly the next few questions. So what are the benefits of cooling potatoes before eating them? I love that someone's been paying attention. Love this question. So cooked and cooled potatoes, what happens when we cook them and then cool them, it promotes the conversion of something called resistant starch. Resistant starch is the portion of a starch that literally is what it sounds like. It resists digestive enzymes. So what happens is they pass through the whole digestive process undamaged or unharmed, or they're kind of left alone and there they go. And then they go all the way until they reach the large intestine. And in the large intestine, they are fermented by bacteria that reside there in a good way. And when resistant starch is fermented, there are these metabolites that are created as a response. And one of the best well-known researched one is butyrate, and that's a short chain fatty acid, and it's really our friend. Butyrate is our friend. We want more butyrate in our life. So butyrate helps to regulate our appetite. It reduces inflammation and oxidation, and it also reinforces the barrier of the intestinal wall. These are all really good things. And so this is just an image of that. So our food, like our potato that we cooked and then we cool it, it increases those resistant starches, goes into the large intestine where it gets fermented, and it has all these great effects in the gut. And then that has implications for the rest of our body systemically. So let's just say, because I think some of you might be thinking this, what happens if you take them out because you've already cooked and cooled them and you reheat them? You're going to lose some of the resistant starches, but if you reheat them, you'll retain some of them. But this is why a niçoise salad might be really appealing to you, because those cold cooked potatoes are really high in resistant starch, the highest out of any food we can possibly eat. Resistant starches promote gut health. I'm just reiterating, lower the glycemic index of food. So it really helps in managing those blood sugars, and it promotes satiety. Most of us are looking for that in our lifetime. Okay. I think this is the last question. I'm new to trying low carbs and finding that high protein is filling me up. This is very common, and I'm not eating more than 1,100 calories per day. Yikes. Is that safe? I'm really glad someone asked this question. And then how about Nuri drinks and Quest chips in terms of nutrients instead of food? Great questions. Okay, so let me first define low carb. So low carb is less than 26% of calories from carbohydrates, or less than that target of 130 grams per day that I gave initially, if you remember. Now, there are some theoretical concerns about long-term safety of low-carb diets, by the way, just to share. So low-carb diets do demonstrate a neutral to a small increase in LDL cholesterol. So good to know. Okay, so if that's in your history or you're concerned about that, you might want to revisit that with your care team. We don't want to rise our LDL if we can help it. And there's a lot of variables that play into that too, but just FYI. And I would caution, if you're eating a high protein diet, if you have kidney disease, just get the okay from your healthcare team that you're eating all this extra protein, and what are the protein sources, because we want to maintain and preserve that kidney function. Now, healthy low carb, as well as healthy, meaning like nutritious, low fat diets work. They both work. They work differently for different people. So that's why I think fine tuning and trial and error and experimenting this and seeing what works for you is important. Those are associated with lowering our risk for mortality. So good to know. Okay. Now, unhealthy low carb and low fat diets, they're the opposite, right? So then we want to really dive deeper into what are we talking about here? If you're eating low carb, I want those carbs to be quality. I want them to be healthy at the end of the day. Okay. This suggests that the quality of the food matters more than just the level or the amount that you're eating. Okay. So that 1,100 calories. Now, most experts recommend, I know I learned this in school and I had to go back to the research to make sure it was still true. Most recommend that women and men do not consume less than 1,250, 1,500 calories per day, respectively. The risk when we go that low is that we're not eating enough. So if we're not eating enough, we might not eat enough vitamins and minerals. And the research suggests that's true for calcium and iron. So that again might be relevant to the person asking this question. I always wonder, is it sustainable? I think like chances are it is because you're feeling so full. But when the holidays come around or it's a birthday, and you want to reintroduce some carbs, navigating that, I want that to be easier for you to do. Now, here's the thing, also about 1100 calories. Our body has this really crazy way of adapting. And some people say it's like a conspiracy against weight loss. Like our body just doesn't want to lose. And if it's so low calorie, there actually are these negative feedback circuits that trigger us to eat. And they're very powerful because that's all based on survival and biology. Because your body doesn't know better. It's just trying to survive. So what can happen is sometimes you might find this. It doesn't sound like the case because the protein is really satiating you, but just for the audience to be aware of that. Okay. So going back to 1100 calories, I mean, I would love for this person to set for a target of at least 1200. So that might mean just adding back a little bit of carbohydrates and swapping out some of that protein potentially. And maybe it's plant proteins because then there might be a nice little kind of even distribution there. If you're using a tracking app, that might be helpful because if you know you're eating 1100 calories, you might know what are your macro breakdowns. So try to think in terms of what might be on the lower end for carbs, right? Because that's what is in a well-planned diet, that's what's promoting health and good outcomes. And I'm sure that's what is important to you as well. So if you skew towards the lowest end of that range for carbs, the highest end of that range for protein, then maybe that's your version of a low carb, high protein diet while finding fat kind of in the middle there to satisfy health requirements, right? And of course, consider working with a dietitian. Okay, last couple slides. So the Nuri drinks and the Quest chips, I mean, they're okay, right? It's really hard. It's hard for me to answer that because I don't know what else you're eating or not eating, and that might help. Now, to try to answer that question, could you do better? Yes, you could do better. Could you do worse? Yes, you could probably do worse. I would say if you're looking for nutrition, what happens when we make food, like when we process foods that are naturally occurring? So both of these products are what I would call ultra processed. Like they're not something we can replicate in our kitchen. They're probably mass produced. They would require a lot of sophisticated techniques, right? That we don't have, and they're producing them on a mass scale. So what happens when we make food that way is that it's not quite the same nutrition, right? And I think this is just intuitive. It's not going to be the same as like a yogurt parfait that you, especially if you made it. That is going to retain more nutrition. You're going to have more vitamins and minerals. And if you include something like berries, you're going to have more cancer fighting compounds in that. Cottage cheese, same concept. I always go Greek with cottage cheese and I think of herbs and spices and tomatoes. Like now you're getting these special properties that no manufactured food can offer. Okay. Instead of the Quest chips, I haven't had Nuri drinks, but I've had Quest chips and they're pretty good. Are they better than a Dorito? Sure. But could you do better with nutrition with a hard-boiled egg and some veggies? Of course, peanut butter and some fresh fruit. Of course, it's not going to be as high protein. But if you're eating the 1100 calories, then you're looking to eat a little bit more while not feeling so full on protein. If you reduce the protein and add back some carbohydrates that are high quality, this might be like a nice compromise or like a nice little happy medium for you. Um, Highly processed foods, just by the way, they're acceptable within an overall cancer protected diet, but just think, could you replace it with something else? What are you going to replace it with? What could it be more nutritious? And that's like the ideal, so sometimes there's priorities, and sometimes maybe this is serving its purpose for you to use these highly processed foods. They work, they taste good, they're convenient. That's fine. Right. So maybe that's the next step for you down the road or immediately. I think that's something for you to contemplate. Okay, great questions. Um, um, and I basically just shared that, so I'm going to keep moving. So just to share a little bit more about, and that title of the slide is wrong, so sorry about that. These are some recipes, mostly recipes, these links and resources. The Mediterranean diet here has lots of different recipes and meal plans. The DASH eating plan is literally an eating plan with recipes, really helpful website that I included two versions of it. If you're looking for blood sugar friendly recipes for Thanksgiving, that first link might also be something of interest for you. And our next Ask the Dietitian is the first Friday in December. How did that happen? Here we are. And our topic is herbs and spices. So I hope you will be able to join us then. Thank you for watching. I'm going to stop my share.